So I guess I take a somewhat different legal and perhaps moral position. I don't believe that the continuation of the MEK listing is inaction in itself. I think that the continued and unjustified listing of that organization on the FTO list is promoting and facilitating, regardless of any bad intent, conspiracies and murders and atrocities and war crimes, and will continue to do so. The principle of protecting the residents of Camp Ashraf is absolutely undisputed. There is no confusion about that. Under the 4th Article of the Geneva Convention, all of these individuals are protected persons. They wear badges. You can see some of them on the film, which identifies them as United Nations protected persons. Beyond the conventions of the United Nations, the United States of America, as you heard from one of our colleagues, promised the safety of these residents when it handed over the jurisdiction and the authority to the Iraqi government. It has been proved beyond question that the Iraqi government is incapable, and an argument can be made, totally non-committed to the continued protection of these protected persons. In that case, the United Nations and even the United States, which has its promise on the record, has to intervene and take over that protection. There can be no excuse and no delay and no substitution for that moral imperative. You've heard several times today that the listing of the MEK organization on the FTO list is unjustified according to the facts and the law. I spent a lot of years as a judge, as a prosecutor, looking for facts, gathering facts, analyzing facts, presenting facts, and making decisions. There are no facts, there are no construable set of facts which justify listing this organization. You've seen the principles, the human rights principles and the freedom principles of Mrs. Rajavi. There is no conceivable factual argument that this organization is a terrorist organization. And every day, every hour that this organization remains so incorrectly and unfairly listed, we are providing to the regime in Iran and its surrogates in Iraq a license to kill. The United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, which is respected as probably the most important appellate court next to the United States Supreme Court, looked at the classification, looked at the classified information that the State Department very inably and very ineptly presented to the court to justify the continuation of this FTO listing regarding the MEK. The court sent this matter back to the Secretary of State months ago, last July, and said, you haven't looked at the facts and your sources are not credible. For 8 months, whatever rocket scientists in Foggy Bottom are reviewing this, they still have it wrong. And there is no indication, publicly or otherwise, that this classification is corrupt. Just observe who's on the panel here. You've got ambassadors, you've got generals, you've got former FBI directors. They're not here today, but there's former attorney generals, there's former ambassadors, there's former directors of the CIA. Do you think any of us would be seriously involved in making this argument if we thought for a moment that this organization had any terrorist tendencies? The answer is absolutely not. So in conclusion, And this is non-political. You've got the whole political spectrum up here, and I could show you more examples of that in terms of who's taken public positions on this. And we're very proud to be Americans. But you know what? The first administration to look at this issue got it wrong, and that was the Clinton administration. They put the organization on the list, as you heard, to try to appease what they were told was a moderate new president of Iran, the same president that was supervising the development of the nuclear weapons program, by the way. They went back to the Bush administration years later and indicated that it was essential that this organization be maintained on the list, despite any facts. And a suggestion was apparently made that there would be less IEDs blowing up Americans in Iraq if the United States insisted on keeping them on the list. Well, that didn't work either, and the second administration was diluted. The third administration is now in power, and as you heard, we have great respect for our political leaders. But last week, they got it wrong. Please don't become the third administration in a row to get this completely wrong. They have the opportunity to correct this. And this is not a very difficult legal or factual decision to make. Number one, take the MEK off the Foreign Terrorist Organization list, Madam Secretary, and your husband's administration put it on. You can actually redeem him by taking some action. Secondly, you must protect the residents of Camp Ashraf. What you saw last week was a rehearsal. It was a warm-up, and it was a test to see what the reaction would be in the United States, in Geneva, in all the European capitals, indeed in all the capitals around the world, if public, satellited, with audio, murderous action was going to be tolerated or not. So it is imperative that action be taken. And in all the press releases out of Iran, in fact, the government of Iraq's press release talked about the justification of what happened last week precisely because this group is a quote-unquote terrorist group. So the United Nations, the United States, has to take over the protection of these residents. It has to do so immediately. And most importantly, and lastly, not only the government of the United States, but the governments of Europe, all of the forces of organized civilization and rule of law around the world have to support the wins for Iranian freedom, both in the MEK and inside the country. And that has to be done on a continuous and committed basis, or else we're going to have more tragedies to be talking about. Thank you very much.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames, Messieurs, c'est Ashraf.